Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our virtual 1812 nights. But first and foremost, we're actually going to get started with our lead brewers, Tom and John over at Brickyard. Tom, John?
All right.
How's it going, everybody?
How you guys doing? Welcome to the fourth annual 1812 night. Unfortunately, we're not doing the event in person this year. That's self-evident. Safety reasons. We're going to go ahead and do virtual this year. But we're glad to have you all on board. I want to thank Glenn, Eric, and Aaron for making this as painless as possible. It's been fairly easy setting this up, and we're glad to have everybody here. So 1812 night started 3 years ago as kind of a celebration to a power outage day that was a lot like today. We hope you all have power. I wasn't present. I wasn't working here yet, but John was here with Steve Matthews, and long story short, power went out, but people kept pouring into Brickyard, so they lit everything by candlelight, and they went along with that. They just told stories. It's a very old world event. So when I came to Brickyard from Fort Niagara State Park, John had told me the story, and I thought that would be a great opportunity to celebrate 1812, the War of 1812, and our community's history. So, we got with the Old Fort, partnered with them. They made it reality, and it's been a great way for us to exploit traditional styles that aren't usually available, stuff that's on cask, old world beer that you can't necessarily get or people want.
Like this.
Yeah.
Like Cunning Use of Flags that nobody would ever buy if it wasn't 3 years, well, now 4 years in the running of us putting this in a cask every year in March and having you guys all come for candlelight drinking and music and revelry.
Yeah, so we hope you're all enjoying your beer, or you've picked up your beer. If you have any problems, just contact us, Brickyard, call Brickyard, email us. We'll make sure you guys are all squared away. The beer itself, Cunning Use of Flags, is a British IPA. We went old world with this, so it's not your stereotypical IPA that you buy at the store nowadays. It's brewed with Fuggles and East Kent Golding, I would say the most popular British hops.
Yeah, the most commonly used hops in Britain for a century.
And
or
then,
more.
Yeah, and then we used Maris Otter, which again is an old world British malt that's still used today for British styles such as porters, barley wines, English IPAs, if you can find them. Yeah, it's not like IPAs you get today. It's malty, it's bitter, it's earth-like, it's pine, it's resinous. It's really easy drinking beer at 6.1%, 6.2%. 6.2. And it turned out really nice. The label and the name was inspired by Eddie Izzard, the comedian, the British comedian. Cunning Use of Flags, just talking about how the British Empire has always used, I guess, the cunning use of flags on people that have yet to be established. Yeah, Stronghold Studios does our design. Rob there did a really nice job. And then we also have Bayonet the Whole. This is a Bourbon Barrel Aged Barley wine. It is 11%, so it's a heavy hitter. This beer actually survived the fire we had. It was in barrels in the brewery. And we, once we were allowed to go back into the building, it had been in those barrels for about a year plus. I think it was about a year.
I don't know.
It was about a year.
The last year's been a blur, obviously.
Yeah. But this beer, we pulled from the rubble. It was still in the barrels. And we were able to salvage it. And it's a really nice batch. We had the luxury of, when you barrel age beers, you want temp change, you want that influx of temp because the wood offers different profiles. And so we had the luxury of getting these barrels up to a nice, decent temp when the fire was going.
Yeah, right, 100 degree barrel.
Yeah, so those are our beers that we have to offer. We hope you're enjoying them again. If you haven't picked it up, you can still pick it up. I think, what else we got? Do you want to talk about the original 1812 night? What exactly went on when you guys were there?
Chris Budd, who's in the chat with us tonight somewhere in that Zoom world, was there. It was an epic night in Lewiston where, the power went out and for some reason people just didn't want to leave. So Ken, that owns Brickyard, stayed behind the bar and said that anybody who wanted to come in and drink by candlelight was more than welcome to. So we sat there. Chris closed, brewed and bottled and wandered over. And he brought some beers with him, and it just turned into kind of a bottle share, chat, joking, just an amazing night. That's where we named, Chris was part of the crew that named White Bronco, which is now our house IPA. I don't think we'd be who we are without that name and that core beer. It was just an amazing night. And every year when we do this event, we pay homage to that. It was just a very old world feel with candlelight and just fun without the burden of technology.
Yes, something you don't get very often these days. But yeah, this year's event, clearly it's virtual, and we had the opportunity to exploit that. And we had an admission fee, or a fee for the beers, where 50% of the proceeds we can actually donate to Old Fort Niagara. Like many other businesses, small businesses, they've clearly been hurt by COVID, not having anybody come across the border, or tourism being down in general. So having this event and all of you buying these packages, you all contributed to helping a small business or an organization, a fairly important one in your community. So I want to thank you all for that. And I think that's all we have on our end. So we'll pass it off to Glenn. We'll talk about the fort's role in the War of 1812. And then after that, we have Jordan Smith, a native interpreter, who is going to give his interpretation, his songs. You might have seen him here at a previous 1812 night. So we hope you enjoyed the program, and thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the beers. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, Tom and John. So really quick, before I get into my subject here, I'm going to introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Glenn Gugino. I am the Inter-Programs Manager here at Old Fort Niagara. So today I'd like to focus on, actually talk about the involvement of not only just Fort Niagara, but Lewiston in the War of 1812. And really to get kind of deep in the subject on why things are happening right here along the Niagara border, I'd like to turn back time just a little bit. So first off, I'm going to kind of talk about why Fort Niagara and Lewiston is kind of important in this region. And then have to go back way into the French period. We're going all the way back actually to 1720. So then we actually have a French trade post called the Magasin Royal. We actually had celebrated the 300-year anniversary just last year. Obviously, it starts in Lewiston, right where our park is today is actually a little plaque, and where the painted parking lot is there. That's actually where the building would have been. And the main purpose of that building is to be a connection point between both the French and the Seneca Nation in this area. Mostly it's gonna be just a trade and storehouse, so it's not gonna be too large, it's not a major military post. It holds a couple of Marines. But later they realized that they want a little bit more military involvement in this region. The idea is to actually place a fort in the area, but they realized that the most optimal place to place a military fortification is on the mouth of the Niagara River and Lake Ontario. And thus we have Old Fort Niagara starting here at that time. As we go through the years here, the French expand the fort. They fight an entire war, the 7 Years' War, or the French-Indian War, as many people know as more popularly. It also goes right through into the British hands. They're actually be using this area, both the French and the British, is going to be a connection port and actually a transportation superhighway. We're focusing on, obviously, the water. The water is the most efficient form of travel, both in and out of this continent. So both the French and the English are kind of vying for control of not only the waterway, but the influence and then the power of the local peoples here, the Native Americans. It's very, very important for them to actually have them on their side to not only be successful in war, but also to get those very valuable fur trade items. Now we're going to kind of jump forward just a little bit right towards the end of the American Revolution. And a man I want to talk about, his name is John Jay. Some of you might know him. He's actually popularly known. Actually, he's our first not commander-in-chief, sorry. He's gonna be our first Chief Justice of the United States. But mainly, he's actually be the chief negotiator for the Treaty of Paris in 1783. He's gonna be the one over in France, when talking to the British and with the American support, be able to sign that peace treaty. When he's done that, he comes back and he does that Chief Justice job. And actually, during his time as the Chief Justice, he's going to be actually negotiating the Jay Treaty, eventually signed in 1794. The Jay Treaty does sort of set up the kind of the prelude to war of the War of 1812. Some of the things the Jay Treaty focuses on is actually trying to define a border between both U.S. territory and the British Canadian held territory. We do have a kind of an unofficial border along the St. Lawrence Seaway, obviously, St. Lawrence River going into the Great Lakes, but we have an issue. There are going to be British held forts in U.S. territory. That's one of the main things that the Jay Treaty tries to address. So there are about 8 forts that the British are then told to vacate and go back over to the Canadian side. 6 of them are going to be on the St. Lawrence Seaway, one of them obviously including Fort Niagara, and 2 or 3 of them are going to be up along the northern end of Lake Champlain. Another thing that the Jay Treaty is going to address is going to be actually the travel and trade between natives Americans, and Canadian subjects. This allows them to freely move between both these borders and conduct trade and travel freely. It's fairly important to make sure that the American line natives, British line natives are going to be able to moving around around North America, and very easy to then trade and travel with other nations as well as the Americans and the Canadians. Now, when we're kind of jetting forward in 1796, eventually this fort is actually then vacated by the British. That's one of the stipulations of the treaty, that the British have to leave by June of 1796. And once they leave, the regiment of artillerists shows up. Eventually, it turns into the first regiment of U.S. artillery, which is actually what I'm dressed as today. The artillerists, their main job is not only to defend ports, but also defend border fortifications, which unfortunately Fort Niagara is thrust into a border fortification. Unfortunately, its defenses are pointed the wrong way, and it does pay the price eventually in the War of 1812. But when we see more hostility starting to occur in the Northwest Territories in Ohio and Michigan, we still have some encroachment of British vessels onto U.S. merchant vessels. We start to see some of the major contributing factors of why the Americans wanted to declare war on England. As we know, Napoleon is making quite a stir in Europe at the time, and the Americans believe that they can actually very quickly stop the encroachment of British onto their sovereign nation. One of the objectives of the Americans here is actually to capture Canada. And what the first thing they're going to be trying to do is actually launch an attack, an invasion. And right here, we have Lewiston being the central hub. General Van Riesling, he's going to be one of the guys that actually is going to be heading this first invasion. He gathers militiamen, he gathers regular troops coming all the way from all across New York State to Lewiston to be able to prepare and actually launch across the Niagara River. Those that know right down where the Hart Park is, it's actually a fairly narrow neck of the Niagara River, but it actually moves very quickly. Unfortunately, about those 4,000 troops that are there, there's only about 13 boats. So it takes quite a bit of time to then transport them across the river. One of the other things that they're primarily going to do before actually launching across the river is setting up a battery on the heights of Lewiston. Now, when they actually first start this invasion, they start to fire upon other batteries across the river at Queenston Heights. And actually, this wakes another British officer all the way down to Fort George. Sir Isaac Brock hears the 12-pounders being fired upon the British position, gets up out of his bed, onto his horse, and begins a hard gallop straight at Queenston Heights. Now, about 1,000 soldiers make it across, not too many. The majority of the troops that are actually in this force are going to be militiamen. Contextually and actually constitutionally, they're not legally obligated to then go across the river and invade another country. It becomes more of a sticking point later in the war, but we actually have a lot of regulars moving across under fire from a redan or a small breastwork on the opposite side to actually capture and actually fire upon the landing party. They were able actually to disembark. They take some severe casualties, but fortunately, the Americans are able to push up the hill and capture this redan and an 18-pounder that sits there. So unfortunately, this is where we get to a little bit of a standstill. We get a lot of pushback on boat timing. There's not a lot of boats going back and forth, bringing wounded back to the New York side and bringing new troops to the other side. It becomes kind of a mess very, very, very quickly. And unfortunately, as Sir Isaac Brock arrives at the battle, he tries to do a quick, swift counterattack towards that post. Unfortunately, gets shot and killed pretty rapidly. As the fort starts to actually spin up and actually start to load their cannons, Fort George realizes that they need to send troops down to Queenston Heights and actually aid in that action. They realize that there's no boats coming across to land on the west side of Fort George, so they're not needed. At that same time, Fort Niagara opens fire with hot shot right into both Fort George and unfortunately in some of the private homes over in Newark. With that, the Fort George actually starts firing back, and a nice ensuing bombardment between Fort George and Fort Niagara is happening simultaneously as soldiers are fighting over in Queenston Heights. Unfortunately, as those troops arrive to Queenston Heights, the troops on top of that ridge, that redan, try to then withdraw. Unfortunately, they're caught without any boats to return, and most of them actually do get captured. Actually, some of the notable people that are captured actually at this battle is one of them, actually Winfield Scott. He's one of the premier commanders of this invasion, but also Andrew Doyle, husband to one of our most famous heroines at Fort Niagara, Betsy Doyle. So unfortunately, he is captured, taken all the way to Quebec, and eventually finds a home in Dartmoor Prison. As some of us know, it's not a great place to be in the 18th or 19th century. Flashing a little bit forward into the November and December of 1812. Obviously, that Queenston Heights battlefield, that invasion was abandoned. It didn't happen. There were two more attempts. Instead of launching from Lewiston, they launched from Black Rock. It's a little bit easier to launch from there. Unfortunately, both of those invasions are kind of stillborn. They don't make it across the river, and they're not able to then make a foothold to then capture Canada. Jetting forward again into May of 1813. We have some more activity along the front here. We have some more activity with more troops coming in. For example, Lieutenant Colonel McFeely, as he's passing through the Niagara region from the Carlisle barracks in Pennsylvania, he actually walks by and stops and admires Niagara Falls. And to him, it's actually not that impressive for him. But as he approaches Lewiston, he gets starstruck and actually is then enamored with the what he calls the mountain at Lewiston, basically this escarpment. We have one hill here. It's kind of how we like it, but he gets very, very impressed with the escarpment here as he goes forward to take command of Fort Niagara. In 1813, not only him, but Winfield Scott are actually going to be invading Canada. Now, again, it still has some activity here in Lewiston. There's going to be an attempted or a feint attack again at Queenston Heights. The British believe that there's going to be another invasion on the Niagara River side of the Niagara corridor. Now, fortunately, that actually is not true. The main assault force comes from around Fort Niagara, attacking Fort George, and actually is fairly successful all up until the fall. Unfortunately, they didn't complete their entire objective. They retreated back to American lines, back to the New York side, and then they lay low for the winter. But as we know, going into December of 1813, Fort Niagara is actually going to be under attack. The column and actually the forces are crossing the river, going into New York territory. They're actually landing just 5 miles down the river here on a road. Now they'll actually be getting off of this bank and actually splitting up into two main forces. Lieutenant Colonel Murray is actually going to be attacking Fort Niagara, and another Major General Riley is actually going to be headed towards Lewiston. Now, obviously, we know here at Fort Niagara, the fort is captured fairly quickly. It's captured within 30 to 40 minutes. Where you see the flag behind me is actually going to be captured and brought back. It's actually General Drummond's house. He's actually the lead commander of this entire wing attacking New York. Raleigh's main objective is going to be actually going down and silencing the battery atop of Lewiston Heights. But as the forces approach with their native warriors, things do start to get out of hand, and then Lewiston is unfortunately caught in the crossfire between the main British objective, being that battery on Lewiston Heights, and actually not only the settlement of Lewiston, but also another Tuscarora settlement close by. And unfortunately, almost the entirety of Lewiston and that Tuscarora settlement is burned, almost all the way up to Fort Schlosser, which is very close to where Niagara Falls is today. And unfortunately, almost every single place is going to be burned. Civilians are unfortunately going to be leaving in mass. They're going to be leaving in the middle of the night, barely clothed, barely equipped to handle a very harsh New York winter. Even Betsy Doyle, that famous heroine, is actually fleeing both Fort Niagara and this Western New York area, and it flees as far as Greenbush, New York, which is just above Albany. So she flees very, very far and wide to get away from the British here. We actually know lots of the officers are encouraging people in settlements on the Western New York area, the Niagara corridor, to leave and to seek shelter somewhere else. Fortunately, there's a small action at Black Rock. Unfortunately, Black Rock yet again is caught in the middle between U.S. and British forces, and most of those buildings are also burned. But fortunately, the state does come in a little bit later, actually grants money and actually loans towards the families and the businesses that are lost their livelihoods, both in Black Rock and in Lewiston. And that's really the reason why that we have Lewiston being founded in 1818 and not all the way back in the middle of the 18th century. So that's actually my little portion here. I'm actually going to hand it off to Jordan Smith. He's going to give you his demonstration.
Sego Seguiguego, Jordan ni Yungyats Nilsur ni Geha, Wagatsunu ni Jigan Egas, Garlum Warlage, Ayamashi, Aizwa Dagaridige, Danu Sewa Huadra Leone. So my name is Jordan Smith. I belong to the Mohawk Nation. I'm a member of the Bear Clan. I'm glad to be here online with everyone tonight, and I hope everybody's healthy out there, as well as your families. So my main objective here is to kind of give the Native history, which is also local history here as well. And I'm going to start back even a little further than Glenn did now. In our oral histories, it tells us that I would say in the mid-13 to mid-1400s is when our confederacy, what is called the Haudenosaunee, comes together. Now, not too far from here, as Glenn had mentioned on this, the one hill we have here in the Niagara region, this escarpment in Mohawk, we say Deganoy-Orange, where the rocks are split. So there's a settlement there long ago, before the Osroni-Uwe, or the French, came here and established settlements. This territory was originally belonged to the Cat Nation, or the Erie Nation, as they're also known as, and the lake itself gets that name from that nation around its banks. So there was this woman by the name, she becomes known as Jagonzeze, and again, she was a member of the Cat Nation. Now, she becomes known as the very first clan mother, or the mother of all nations. Here, just outside Lewiston on that escarpment, was her lodge, was her longhouse, and in this house, she held this this awesome idea to where you could come and get, you can find hospitality there. You can get clean. You can rest if you were traveling. However, you had to leave all your animosity and all your strife outside of her house. Didn't matter if the person on the other side of this longhouse was maybe an enemy of yours, belonged to another tribe or another nation, and you were, at war with them. You would have to leave those weapons of war on the outside of her house. You were ultimately forced to be at peace and break bread with this individual across the fire from you, even though you had your differences. Now, the peacemaker, when he comes with this great, awesome idea to distribute this this togetherness, this Gatnikolio, this good mind, he comes across the Six Nations, originally just beginning with the Mohawks. Now, the 5 original nations were at war with one another. We're locked up in this blood feud, and we're going from village to village, kind of in retaliation for things that other nations or other tribes have done to us. So we're in this constant vicious cycle, never-ending cycle of violence. Now, the peacemaker, he understands that if we all get together and use one mind, as he says it, if we all use one mind and use that peaceful mind, we're a very, very powerful entity. And with this idea, he grabs one arrow and breaks it easily. He then grabs 5 arrows and bundles them together to show the strength and unity of the 5 original nations of the Haudenosaunee. Now, this woman, it was her main objective, Jagonzese, to kind of help pave the way to the way that we conduct ourselves as Haudenosaunee. Now, the women are the backbones of our society and of our culture. And with this woman, Jagonzese, she was the very first one to instill these values back into the native people. So even to this day, our women are in control of all of our, I guess you would say, diplomatic proceedings. The women have always had a voice in anything that's taken place here on this continent with native nations or tribes, but also our women had great influence on any of the treaties and any of the relationships that were started between the native people and the French, or the native people and the British and the Americans after that. So with that being said, our women being so important, we have a song to honor our women. It's called Eskene Gainase. Now, it just doesn't honor native women. It honors all women, as you are the givers of life. The earth that we live upon is also called our mother, the earth. And she also gives us life and gives us the sustenance we need. So we honor all women, and Turtle Island herself with what we call Eskene Gainase, the New Woman Shuffle Dance. Yo, yo, ya, hey, yo, ya, hey, yo, ya, hey, yo, how we yo, how we yo, in that kind of ya, yo, ya, hey, yo, ya, hey, yo, ya, hey, yo, how we yo, how we yo, in that kind of ya, oh, yo. Yo, ho, ya, hey, yo, ho, ya, hey, yo, ho, yo, in it, yo, ho, yo, in that kind of ya, hey, yo, ho, ya, hey, yo, ho, ya, hey, yo, ho, ya, hey, yo, ho, yo, in it, yo, ho, yo, in that kind of ya, hey, yo, ho, yo, ho, ya, hey, yo, ho, ya, hey, yo. Eskene Gainese, the New Woman Shuffle Dance. Now, when the women are doing this dance, they're actually imitating what the Sky Woman has done. So in our creation story, a woman falls from the heavens to create the earth that we walk upon. And when she does this, she caresses and massages soil brought to her from underneath the water, placed on the back of a turtle. And when she does this dance, the shuffle, that's when the turtle island or Mother Earth, she begins to grow and she begins to form. That's our a little bit of our history here locally, and a little bit of an origin story of the Haudenosaunee and how the earth started. Now, getting a little further into in more Haudenosaunee involvement here, the Seneca people, who eventually, are a member of this confederacy, they end up taking over a lot of the territory here in Western New York. Originally, they are from the Genesee River Valley area, and their main villages were mostly that way long before the European contact. Now, after contact and them becoming in a good relationship with the French, they start to move out this way and start to obtain the territory here as well. Now, one of the reasons that they're grasping on this territory is to kind of take a little bit of control of the fur trade that's going on, that the Europeans are really, they're really hunting for those beaver pelts. Here in Haudenosaunee country, it's pretty much your way into the rest of the continent. You're coming through our territory here, which is originally New York State, and all down the St. Lawrence Seaway. All of the Finger Lakes and all of the tributaries into these lakes are surrounded by Haudenosaunee people and other smaller nations as well. So we have our hands in, I guess you could say, in this cookie jar, so we can benefit from this trade that's taking place. Now, when the French put this fort here, they kind of have this idea to put up a house of peace. And they did have, like Glenn had mentioned, the Magazine Royale, just further down up the river, should I say, at our park. However, they needed something that was a little more permanent. Building a stone house was one of the ideas they had, but they kind of pitched the idea to the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee as a house of peace. Now, they already had a good relationship for quite some years going on between the Senecas, the French, and the other surrounding natives here in Western New York and beyond. However, they didn't have really anything that was too permanent, too structurally sound. The old fort was made of wood, and wood can easily be burned down or dilapidate over time itself. So with this idea of a house of peace, they come to the council of the 5 nations or the 6 nations, and they discuss with those Grand Council of Chiefs about this awesome house of peace they want to put up. Now, not all of the representatives were there, specifically not the Seneca representatives that had to say so were there as well. However, the census was still allow the French to put the French castle or the Fort Niagara here on the mouth of the river. So after a while, this relationship between the French and the British, it kind of comes here and it boils over, and you have native tribes or nations on each side fighting for their right to survive, for their territory, for their right to have trade and to continue to exist as a people. Now, as these European brothers are fighting, they're trying to get all of the nations around them, specifically the 6 nations, because we're such great warriors and we had a lot of influence on the area here, being in this this confederacy. So they want to get as many of the 6 nations warriors as they can. However, when you're trading with different people in different areas, you get pulled into opposite directions. This happens with the confederacy. It puts us in a civil war, to where we are fighting amongst ourselves within our confederacy, and it puts a strain on the strength that we, as a United Nations, can continue to exist. Now, being a Mohawk, our people, the Mohawk, most of us side with the British throughout all of these conflicts in their entirety. Here in Seneca territory, for a long time, they sided with the French. The Tuscarora during these times just decided to side with the Americans after so long and fight with the people on this side of the Niagara River. After the Revolutionary Wars, Mohawks, because we sided with the British, we have a tract of territory that's kind of put off to the side for us outside of Brantford and Caledonia, Ontario, Canada. It's called Ashwaubenon or 6 Nations Reserve. And that's where a lot of the Mohawks are coming for these, these expeditions onto Lewiston, onto Black Rock. A lot of the Mohawks who are coming from Six Nations are those guys that are, traveling and still fighting along the British, and they're fighting their relatives here on the southern side of the river. Now, the Senecas, they tried to stay as neutral as they could during the Revolutionary War, as well as the Onondagas and the Cayugas. However, those Mohawks, we always pretty justly stood by the side of the British. Now, it could have been directly related to a relationship between Joseph Brant, who was a pretty influential Mohawk war captain, and his relationship with Sir William Johnson, who is the superintendent of the Indian Department for the Crown. They had a really good relationship, and Sir William Johnson understood and utilized some of those native customs to continue this good relationship with the Mohawks specifically. A little after the Revolutionary War, you then have this little uprising that takes place. Now, you have the Senecas here who are in charge of portaging the goods, basically from the lower river to the upper river, to get those goods back into the rest of the interior of the country. After so long, after that French and Indian War takes place, and this place, Fort Niagara, falls to British hands, the British do not want to utilize those Senecas. So they kind of make this journey up the river on their own, and the Senecas take offense to this, as they've had this relationship, and they kind of relied on the trade and the income, so to speak, that they were receiving from portaging these goods. They took offense to this, and they push all of these people, all of these carriages, all of these animals over the escarpment into the gorge of the river. It's what we know today as the Devil's Hole Massacre. Now, that place is still located here, Devil's Hole State Park. It's a beautiful place. It's got nice trails, and it's all connected to the local history here as well. So the War of 1812 starts to pick up, and again, the natives and the Six Nations, where we are struggling really hard to keep our confederacy together. We're struggling really hard to maintain territory so we can continue to exist and survive as Ongwe or as original people. And again, this conflict pulls us in to a civil war. So now, through all of these, these conflicts that are taking place, from the French and Indian War through the Revolutionary War up to the War of 1812, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is literally fighting amongst themselves as well. And what we're trying to accomplish is a place to continuously call our own, to maintain onto our home territory as much as we can. Now, the Haudenosaunee people, we are one of the only few native confederacies still in existence to this day, as far as having our traditional form of government, where we utilize our clan mothers and our chiefs. We're still here. We still conduct matters traditionally the same way we did, 300, 400, and 500 years ago. So again, leading back to our women, it's because our women held onto that strength and kind of, that responsibility they have, and all of that say they have throughout our governance system, really what kept us people here pretty much going to this day. So I'm going to share another song, and it pertains to the War of 1812. Now, every time we do a presentation and we're educating people, they want to hear a war dance, because we always hear stories of war dancing around a fire, the natives hooting and hollering. And all I can say is that we're not at war anymore with anybody. However, we do still have those traditional songs. We sing those in our ceremonies. But the last time a war dance was done for that reason was during the War of 1812, and all of that fighting takes place here within the Niagara frontier. So again, these songs are directly related to the local history here, and in the Mohawk language we say wasase, which translates to the war dance. So I'm going to sing an older style war dance song, and then I'm going to kind of bring it into a more contemporary style, what we call a fast war dance or a smoke dance. So the war dance and the smoke dance. And again, the last time the war dance was done for that purpose was during the War of 1812. And again, directly related to here in our home territory of Western New York, the beautiful Niagara region. And I think that's all I have for myself. And I believe we're going to leave it open for some questioning. If anybody has any questions, I think are we typing them into?
We have some typed, and we're going to ask some of the people to, if you have a question, to start. We're going to start with Sylvia. She was the first one to weigh in. Sylvia, weird. If you could actually unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Are you muted?
I'm unmuted, and I'm so here we are, and we're really excited to hear about your stories. I would love to know how the rebuild is going.
We're getting there slowly but surely. We're shooting for Memorial Day. We don't know if that's going to happen. There's always delays with construction, but definitely we will be open this summer.
That sounds great. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Sylvia, you had another question. You might as well ask that as well.
I might as well keep on going. So, Glenn, what a surprise. As everyone laughs. So, if we had been successful at the attack on Brock's Monument, do you think that the United States could have kept Canada?
Probably not. The amount of support that the U.S. forces have in Lewiston, yes, might seem a lot, 4,000. With the amount of troops that are actually not only here in the Niagara Peninsula, but over in Quebec and Montreal, greatly outnumber any sort of federal troops, nor the militiamen that actually are able to come at a moment's notice. If they would have gotten over there, it would have been a great foothold, but very similarly, like it happened in May of 1813, might have gotten there, gotten stuck, and then actually retreated back towards the New York side. A lot of the troops that are coming from England actually are fairly experienced, battle-hardened troops fighting Napoleon over in France. Also, these commanders have been not only fighting in North America, but fighting in India, the West Indies, continental Europe. So they have not only an experienced military, but also a very experienced officer corps. And definitely, as we all know, it makes it a very hard fight for the U.S. troops in the War of 1812.
We have a question from...
I have a follow-up. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
He's smiling. Okay, so here the British troops had to leave all of these forts in America just very recently. So did all of those troops go to Canada and basically stay there so that they might actually have been a more substantial force for an invasion to contend with?
The troops that are remaining in U.S. territories around the J Tree, if you want to think about it as kind of a skeleton crew, they realized that in the negotiations with the J Tree that there is going to be, obviously, they need to move back to Canada. Some of the references we have at Fort Niagara, they have such a small amount of troops, and the maintenance on the buildings is so low, is that when the company of artillerists shows up, the fort is basically broken. Basically what they did is they took up all their supplies, they took up all the cannon, and they moved across into Niagara on the Lake as we know it now. As the hostilities start to build between both the British Canadians and Britain and the Americans, you start to see more battalions coming over from England to garrison places like in Burlington and other small hamlets and small towns on the Niagara Peninsula. So it's kind of like a prelude. They can see these things coming kind of from a mile away. One of the things we know is the Embargo Act. Though it does fail, it is kind of a big act, a big treaty kind of saying for the U.S. to kind of push out British influence. And when we start seeing that stuff coming, it starts to then build some sort of hostilities between both of them. So they start to bring in much more troops by the time it reaches 1809, 1810, 1811.
We had a question.
Thank you.
We had a question from Dennis, and actually this is for Chris Booth. So Dennis, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to pick on Chris for a minute and see if he could give us an update on the Brewed and Bottled progress.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
very quickly to sum it up, they're putting drywall up, and we're further than we have ever been, and it's actually speeding up. So just like Brickyard Brewing Company, we're hoping that it'll be summertime. That's the most confident answer I can give, but it's speeding along. And we can't wait to do some fun stuff with our neighbors because we'll be located right next door.
We have a question from Ed Pierce. Ed, go ahead and unmute yourself. If you're on a cell phone, it's either *6 or *9. Okay, seems to be a problem. I'll go ahead and ask the question. Ed's of native descent. He has a question for Jordan. What is the significance of the triangle on your septum pierce?
So really the triangles that I'm wearing, we see a lot of, I guess, things being made of other items that are broken. And one of the things that we're doing specifically as Native people is we're taking trinkets like these little triangles and we're decorating them, decorating ourselves with them. The more silver I can obtain, some of those trade goods, it's going to make me a little more influential with my brethren or my Roscarangeti, my warriors, if I can fashion and outfit them with these trade items. So the silver that I'm wearing in my ears as well are triangles. A lot of them come in this fashion being made from something else. So whether it was a bracelet or an armband or a hatband, these things can be refabricated into other things. So there's always a use for something. Even some of the brass kettles that we find are broken, and some of those brass parts are then turned into jewelry as well. A lot of the other ball cone, I guess you would call them, type of earrings, type of jewelry that we're wearing, they actually come from the reins of the horses. So they would jingle as these horses are going along. Often that phrase "bells on bobtail" comes to my mind, because they would kind of make this tinkling sound. If I have enough in my face or in my ears, people can hear me walking through the parade grounds as well. So really just decorative, so to speak, to each individual.
We have a question from Chris for BBC. Chris, go ahead. I'll go ahead and ask it. Chris wants to know, BBC, can we please have a BBC do a spruce beer? I really like to have a good one, and they are discussed every year at F&I event at the Fort.
If Chris agrees to buy it all and drink it all because he wants it, he can have it.
But we actually did brew a spruce beer for or do you remember doing it?
Yeah, last year's 1812 night.
Last year's 1812 night, we did a spruce beer on cask. Again, what I said earlier was 1812 night is really exciting for John and I, because we get to do things that usually aren't wanted or desired. So we pulled up actually a couple old recipes. We pulled up a chicken ale, a cock ale, where you fillet a chicken and put it in the mash tun. We did that. And then we did a spruce beer. It was on cask. It was honestly exceptional. It was subtle.
It was really good.
It's some things, some notes you get out of an IPA, usually from the hops, like clearly pine, citrus, orange zest. It turned out really nice. So going forward, if you come to next year's 1812 event, we'll most likely have a spruce beer. And I think I remember seeing at the Fort what they were talking about the spruce beer, because I'm sure Glenn could correct me if I'm wrong, but at the bottoms they had, or they found, traces of casks from archaeological digs, along with what would have been a brewery. A lot of it was done in-house. A lot of it was done by women brewing those days. And spruce beer was readily available because it's easy to make. It's essentially just sugar water. You're not relying on grains, which are heavy to carry around to make it. And it lasted. Spruce is filled with vitamin C. You get nutrients from it. And it's also preserved. So as far as the spruce beer goes, come to next year's 1812 night and we'll have spruce beer for you.
Or maybe if Glenn wants a cask of it for F&I, we can make that happen.
That would actually be pretty cool, because we actually have references of the British after they captured the fort here, getting orders to make spruce beer because of the gardens being non-existent. after being destroyed, because yet again, they need that supplement to their diet, that spruce beer, that's vitamin C. So we do have references just the year after of them actually making spruce beer. That'll be really cool.
There you go, book it.
Book it. We'll do it for you.
Claudia Andres agrees the spruce beer was great. And she also has a question if you want to unmute yourself, Claudia.
I was going to have you just read it. We wondered what they actually called the village in Youngstown. Lewiston was called Lewiston, but what was Youngstown called? Was there a village? Was it called the Bottoms, or what was it? In 1812, sorry.
Oh, so what Tom's referring to is the Bottoms is the kind of shipping and trading center located just outside the fort. So if you know where the Coast Guard station is on our grounds, that's where the Bottoms would have been. There would have been some sort of settlements during the late 1790s and going into the 19th century. You see more civilians start to make permanent residence, farms outside of Fort Niagara. But the Bottoms are referring to the shipping and trading center of Fort Niagara.
Now, Stone has a question. How did local tribal relations change after the War of 1812, both between the tribes and Americans?
Oh, man.
That's a really good question, yeah.
Pretty much after that War of 1812, everything kind of simmers down and pretty much is stagnant for the nations as far as nation-to-nation relations. And unfortunately, I would say it's kind of the same way for the native relations to the Americans. They're kind of brushed off to the side. Now you got to understand, like, we fought on both sides of this conflict. And for instance, the Oneidas, they fight with the Americans. But when that treaty is all said and done, they're still part of the Six Nations or the Haudenosaunee, and they're grouped in, and their land gets taken away just like the rest of the Haudenosaunee. So many of our leaders are continuously trying to talk peace continuously through all these conflicts. So that I guess that attitude from war captain to peace chief is still really I guess a struggle for that power. So there's an imbalance there up until after about the War of 1812, where there really is no need to have those type of warriors anymore, because everything had changed so drastically. There's really not that type of warfare going on because of the technological advances in the weaponry and things like that. So as far as native relationships, they're not bad. But they are definitely still progressing to this day and getting better. Something that continuously has to be worked on is those relationships, unfortunately.
By the way, Chris says he's not sure he can buy them all, but he would like you to make spruce beer still. He's also not able to ask a question, so he has another question. Tom and John and the other Chris has great taste. Please make spruce beer again. There you go. What barrel or blend of barrel was the Bayonet Whole aged in? I'm drinking it right now, and it's wonderful.
I want to say it was Heaven Hill and Jim Beam, wasn't it?
Heaven Hill bourbon barrels, Jim Beam bourbon barrels, and there's a little bit of the 12-year American whiskey blend barrel too. So it's 3 different bourbon barrels.
Back to Ed Pierce, who also doesn't have a mic. This is my first 1812 night. Are there plans to do additional nights such as these types of events?
Good. Well, hopefully next year we can do one in person. You can talk to us in the correct setting.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
And another question from Chris Bood. What was the furthest known reach of trade that local tribes had established in North America?
Okay, so this trade route, before the Europeans even come here, this trade route's taken place. It's all across the continent. Specifically, the Haudenosaunee, we're trading with people as far east as the coast. We're utilizing the beads, the wampum beads that are being produced by, those Narragansetts, those Pequots, those Shinnecocks along Long Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts area. We're utilizing those wampum beads, so there's a continuous trade going on from there. We're also utilizing our round gorgets. So the silver that I'm wearing on my neck is called a gorget. The original one that the natives are wearing here in Haudenosaunee country are shell gorgets, and they're round, and these shells are originated in the Gulf Coast. So we're also trading with people down from the Gulf Coast, who in turn are trading with people down to Central and South America. So you see these wampum beads, all of these different, products coming from the natural world from around these different natives, and they're trading in vast trade routes throughout North America, Central and South America.
Claudia Andres has another question. What would the everyday drink have been at the fort in 1812?
The everyday drink. So obviously, one of the things that soldiers are going to be receiving in their ration is some sort of alcohol. Actually, fairly common for U.S. soldiers. It's actually going to be whiskey. Now, thankfully, the fort's located on one of the freshest bodies of water in the world, so fresh water is fairly easy to come by. But still, you need to make your beverage safe. So that's actually why they're receiving that ration or that jail cup of whiskey, actually to combine it with some sort of water to make it, safe for consumption. But also, yet again, we do have reference to spruce beer. That's a very common thing. If they're not able to, get the required vitamin C or required supplement from their gardening.
Please explain where the flag behind you came from.
So this flag behind me actually is going to be the original garrison flag of Fort Niagara. So this thing was flying over the fort during the attack in 1813. Unfortunately, it was taken as a war trophy by Drummond. He's actually the commanding officer of these two columns that come and attack Niagara County. So when it's actually captured, it's taken back to his home in Scotland. It is actually going to be unfortunately caught in a fire, as you can see behind me. The tea stained or the coffee stained parts of it is fortunately going to be the original flag. Fortunately, it was actually purchased, I think, in 1996 or 97, and is actually now hopefully and actually safely back here at Fort Niagara. It's actually, I think, in my opinion, probably one of our most valued artifacts here in the museum.
Can you explain the relationship between the flag here?
Oh yeah, sure. So the association with the flag, this flag behind me, and the one at McHenry actually is going to be fairly similar. The commandant at Fort McHenry actually sees Fort Niagara's garrison flag flying over the flag bastion towards the North Redoubt, and actually sees it and says, "Hey, I want a copy of that." So actually, the one that flies over, when Francis Scott Key makes the Star Spangled Banner and he writes that, he's actually technically looking at Fort Niagara's garrison flag. They're copies. They're one and the same. They have the 15 stripes and the 15 stars. And fortunately, we get to have our original back with us here at Fort Niagara.
And that looks like it ends all the questions. Unless anybody else has some questions, you can just raise your hand.
1804, and then.
Okay, we have
Go ahead.
Elizabeth. Oh, no, you're not Elizabeth, but whoever's sitting next to Elizabeth.
Western New York.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, doing it. No, I'm not Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth.
Okay.
I have a question. I have a question for Jordan.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to frame this. I've often wondered, given the enmity between parts of the Haudenosaunee, between, say, the Oneida and the Tuscarora versus the Mohawk, I know the Mohawk stands, but did the Oneida and Tuscarora reject Tecumseh's proposal?
I think the majority of the Confederacy didn't reject it. They just didn't get involved. Again, you got to think like we've already been decimated through these wars by the time Tecumseh gets things going.
Right.
And the after effect of what happens to us is kind of what's happening to them out there. And some of the warriors here decided to do this because, again, that old tradition of being a war captain like your grandfather was, it was weighed heavily upon the younger generations coming up. But however, the Haudenosaunee, we try to stay as neutral as possible out of everything.
Okay, thank you very much.